A virgin purchased the most feared mountain man at auction, unaware he'd loved her for years. In the heart of a dusty frontier town, a young ranch girl raises her trembling hand and shocks the crowd. She doesn't buy a horse or a wagon. She buys him the giant in chains, scarred from battles no one dares speak of. The church bell tolls, boots scrape in the dirt, and whispers spread like wildfire. Why would an innocent girl claim the most dangerous man in Colorado? But as the ranch fires burn low at night, his silence hides something no one expects. He bows his head at supper, defends her without raising a fist, and carries a secret carved deep in his soul, a secret tied to her father, and to a love he's hidden for years. Now the law rides hard against them, the sheriff's noose waiting, and the railroad's greed closing in. She saved him once at auction, but can she save him from the hangman's rope? Or will her one act of mercy destroy everything she holds dear? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The Colorado sun beat down mercilessly as Layla Caldwell guided her mare through the dusty streets of Silver Creek. Her mother's quilt lay carefully folded in her saddlebag, wrapped in clean muslin to protect the delicate stitching. Each hoofbeat seemed to echo her racing heart as she thought about parting with the precious keepsake. The leather of her saddle creaked as she shifted, touching the wadded bills in her pocket, all that remained of last month's cattle sale. It wasn't nearly enough to keep the ranch running, not with the drought stretching on and the railroad men pressing in from all sides. She blinked back tears, remembering how her father used to say that pride had no place when duty called. A burst of raucous laughter drew her attention to a crowd gathering near the saloon. Merchants had abandoned their storefronts, and even proper ladies in their Sunday best stood whispering behind gloved hands. Curious, Layla guided her horse closer. $5, someone shouted. I'll raise you a bottle of whiskey, called another. Sheriff Granger stood on the wooden sidewalk, his badge gleaming in the harsh sunlight. Next to him stood a man Layla had never seen up close, though stories of Owen Reddick had circulated through town for years. He was massive, towering over the sheriff despite the chains that bound his wrists and ankles. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, partially hidden by an unkempt dark beard. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and though his head was bowed, there was something dignified in his bearing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the sheriff called out, his voice dripping with false ceremony. "As per territorial law, this man's labor is up for auction to pay his debts to society. 1 month's honest work might do him good, wouldn't you say?" He yanked on the chains, drawing a few cruel laughs from the crowd. Layla's stomach turned. She'd heard of prison labor auctions before, but never thought to see one in Silver Creek. The way the sheriff was conducting it seemed more like a circus show than a legal proceeding. $10, shouted Bert Wilson, the saloon keeper. "Could use some muscle-hauling kegs." $12 and a side of bacon, countered the blacksmith. Through it all, Owen Reddick remained silent, but Layla caught a glimpse of his eyes, deep brown and filled not with the murderous rage of legend, but with a profound weariness that struck her to her core. Her father's words echoed in her memory. "Judge a man by his choices, Layla girl, not by what others say about him." And sometimes a man's worst choices come from having no choices at all. The quilt money burned in her pocket. The ranch needed help. She couldn't manage it alone, and no one in town would work for her, not with the railroad's threats hanging over the Caldwell land. But this man, the stories they told about him. $15, called Wilson again. Final offer. Layla's hand trembled as she pulled the money from her pocket. $25. The words burst from her before she could reconsider. The crowd fell silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Sheriff Granger's smug expression faltered as he turned to face her. "Now, Miss Caldwell," he said, his tone condescending. "This isn't proper business for a young lady. Why don't you run along home?" Heat rose in Layla's cheeks, but she sat straighter in her saddle. "I believe this is an open auction, Sheriff, and I have legal tender to bid." Owen Reddick's head lifted slightly, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or simple human dignity acknowledged. $25, she repeated firmly, holding out the crumpled bills. The sheriff's jaw tightened. He looked around the crowd, but no one dared outbid the Caldwell girl, whether from shock or pity, she couldn't tell. Going once, Granger ground out. Going twice. He paused, scanning the suddenly quiet faces. "Sold to Miss Caldwell." A wave of whispers swept through the crowd. Layla caught fragments that made her cheeks burn hotter. The virgin rancher. Most dangerous man in Colorado. Scandal. Asking for trouble. Dismounting carefully, Layla approached the sheriff, her legs shaking but her spine straight. She counted out the money while he filled out the labor contract with obvious reluctance. "You understand the terms?" Granger asked sharply. "1 month of work. You're responsible for his conduct. Any trouble, and he goes straight back to jail." "I understand." Layla's voice came out steadier than she felt. The sheriff thrust a key at her. "Your problem now, Miss Caldwell. Don't come crying to me when you realize your mistake." Layla took the key, aware of every eye in town upon her as she approached Owen Reddick. Up close, he was even more imposing, but he kept his eyes downcast as she unlocked his chains, her fingers fumbling slightly with the heavy iron locks. The shackles fell away with a clank that seemed to echo down the street. Owen rolled his shoulders slowly, then spoke for the first time, his voice low and rough from disuse. "Much obliged, Miss Caldwell." "Can you ride?" she asked, trying to keep her voice businesslike. He nodded once. "Then we'll need to stop at the mercantile for supplies before heading to the ranch." She turned to face the still watching crowd, raising her voice slightly. "Unless anyone else has business with us." No one spoke, though she saw the disapproval in their faces. Even Mrs. Peterson, who'd taught Layla her letters in Sunday school, turned away with a sharp shake of her head. Layla led her mare to the hitching post outside the mercantile, very aware of Owen's silent presence behind her. She'd spent the last of her money on his contract, but she had credit at the store, at least for now. "Miss Caldwell," Owen said quietly as she tied her horse, "you should know the things they say about me." "Mr. Reddick," she interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. "I reckon we've both heard plenty of things said about each other. Maybe we could start fresh, just two people trying to keep a ranch running." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am, we could do that." As they entered the store, Layla felt the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. She'd spent her mother's quilt money to buy a month's labor from a man the whole town feared. Her reputation might never recover, and there was no guarantee he'd be worth the risk. But when she glanced back at Owen, she saw him tip his hat to Mrs. Miller's little girl, instead of shrinking from her curious stare. The child smiled shyly, before her mother hurried her away, and in that small moment, Layla felt the first flutter of hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd made the right choice. The afternoon sun continued its merciless beat as they gathered supplies, work gloves, basic tools, and enough provisions to last the week. Owen carried everything without complaint, his chains replaced by simple necessity and what Layla prayed was honor. As they prepared to leave town, she couldn't help but notice how the sidewalks had mysteriously emptied, storekeepers suddenly busy with indoor tasks. Let them talk, she thought, squaring her shoulders as she mounted her mare. The ranch wouldn't save itself, and sometimes the right choice was the hardest one to explain. "Ready, Mr. Reddick?" "Yes, Miss Caldwell." He paused, then added softly, "And thank you." She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and turned her horse toward home. The sun was lowering now, painting the dust they kicked up in shades of gold and promise. Behind them, the town buzzed with scandal, but ahead lay the ranch, and whatever future they would build from this strange beginning. The sheriff thrust the key toward Layla with a mocking smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Here you go, Miss Caldwell. 1 month's contracted labor, though I reckon you won't last a day before coming to your senses." Townsfolk gathered closer, their laughter cutting through the afternoon heat as Layla's trembling fingers worked the heavy iron shackles. The metal clinked against itself as Owen's restraints fell away, landing in the dust with a dull thud. "He belongs to you now, girl," Sheriff Granger announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Every bit of trouble he causes falls square on your shoulders." More laughter rippled through the crowd, and someone whispered, "Poor, foolish child." Layla lifted her chin, refusing to let them see how their words stung. "This way, Mr. Reddick," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "The wagon's just past the mercantile." Owen followed silently, his long strides matching her shorter ones with careful precision. His massive frame cast a shadow that seemed to stretch across the entire boardwalk. Layla could feel the weight of the town's stairs as they made their way to her wagon. Its weathered boards and patched canvas cover a testament to the ranch's struggling finances. "You can sit up front," she told him, gesturing to the wagon seat. Owen nodded once and climbed up, the wooden bench creaking under his weight. Layla untied her mare from the hitching post and guided her to the wagon tongue, securing the traces with practiced movements. The mare's ears flicked back nervously, sensing the stranger's presence. "Easy, girl," Layla murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "It's all right." She took her place on the wagon seat, keeping a careful distance between herself and Owen. The reins felt smooth and familiar in her hands, giving her something solid to hold on to as she clucked to the mare and turned the wagon toward home. The rutted road stretched before them, winding past sun-bleached grassland and scattered pine groves. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as the mare plodded forward, kicking up dust that caught the late afternoon light. Owen sat perfectly still beside her, his shoulders hunched slightly against the wagon's constant jostling. Layla snuck glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Up close, his scars told stories of hard living, a jagged line along his jaw, another disappearing into his hairline. But there was something else in his face too, a quietness that didn't match the wild tales she'd heard whispered in town. The silence stretched between them as the sun sank lower, painting the Colorado hills in shades of purple and gold. Owen's eyes flickered toward her occasionally, dark and unreadable, before returning to the road ahead. His massive frame seemed too large for the wagon seat, his knees nearly touching the splintered dashboard. When they finally turned onto the ranch road, Layla felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. The familiar sight of the Caldwell ranch house rose before them, 2 stories of weathered wood and determination, backed by the darkening mountains. Her father had built it with his own hands, adding on bit by bit as the years passed. Now it stood as a testament to his memory, though the peeling paint and sagging porch spoke of better days gone by. She pulled the wagon to a stop near the house. "I'll show you where to put the horse and wagon," she said, breaking the long silence. "Then we can see about some supper." Owen nodded, climbing down from the wagon seat with surprising grace for such a large man. He moved to help her down, then seemed to think better of it, stepping back to give her space. Layla felt a flash of gratitude for this small courtesy. Together they unhitched the mare and led her to the barn, where Owen insisted on helping with the evening chores despite his obvious exhaustion. He worked efficiently, his movements suggesting long familiarity with ranch life. When the mare was settled with fresh hay and water, Layla led the way back to the house. "Wait here a moment," she said at the kitchen door. Inside, she lit the lamp and stirred up the banked fire in the cook stove, adding a few pieces of kindling. A pot of bean stew left warming at the back of the stove would have to do for supper. She hadn't expected company when she'd left for town that morning. She returned to the door where Owen waited patiently. "Please, come in, Mr. Reddick. I hope you don't mind a simple meal." He ducked his head to enter, removing his hat and holding it carefully in his large hands. "No, ma'am. I'm much obliged for anything you choose to share." The kitchen felt smaller with him in it, but not in an entirely uncomfortable way. Layla busied herself with bowls and spoons, setting them on the scrubbed wooden table while the stew heated through. Owen stood awkwardly until she gestured to a chair, then sat with careful movements, as if afraid of breaking the furniture. Steam rose from the bowls as Layla served the stew, the familiar scent of herbs and beans filling the kitchen. She settled into her own chair, folding her hands in her lap as she had every night since childhood. Without thinking, she bowed her head to pray. The words formed silently in her heart. Lord, please guide us through whatever path you've set before us. Keep us safe through the night and help me know if I've done right. When she opened her eyes, surprise flickered through her. Owen's head was bowed too, his own lips moving in silent prayer. He looked up after a moment, meeting her startled gaze with something almost like embarrassment. My mama taught me never to eat without giving thanks, he said quietly. Layla nodded, warmth spreading in her chest. Mine too. They ate in silence, but it felt different now, less strained, more companionable. The lamplight cast soft shadows on the walls, and the familiar creak of the house settling around them was oddly comforting. Owen ate carefully, handling the spoon with deliberate movements that spoke of conscious gentleness. When the bowls were empty, he insisted on helping with the dishes despite Layla's protests. Least I can do, he said, drying each piece with the same care he'd shown at the table. Finally, Layla led him back outside where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. The bunkhouse is this way, she said, lifting the lamp to light their path. It's not much, but it's clean. There are extra blankets in the chest if you need them. The bunkhouse stood a respectful distance from the main house, close enough to be convenient, far enough to be proper. Inside, row of empty bunks lined the walls, a pot-bellied stove squatting in the center of the room. Layla lit the lamp hanging by the door, its warm glow chasing away the shadows. There's clean water in the barrel outside, she said, suddenly aware of how alone they were. I'll bring out breakfast at sunrise if that suits you. That's fine, Miss Caldwell. Owen's voice was soft in the lamplight. And thank you. Not everyone would have done what you did today. Layla nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She hurried back to the main house, her heart pounding with delayed fear and something else she couldn't name. In her bedroom, she changed into her nightgown with trembling fingers. Had she truly invited a stranger, a man the whole town feared, to stay on her property? What would her father have said? But then she remembered Owen's bowed head at supper, his careful courtesy, the gentle way he'd handled her mother's dishes. Perhaps there was more to him than the gossip suggested. Perhaps. Outside, in the growing darkness, Owen stood on the bunkhouse porch. The stars spread above him like diamond dust scattered across black velvet. The same stars he'd watched through prison bars not 24 hours ago. He lifted his face to their cold light, his whispered words carried away by the night wind. Lord, he prayed softly, thank you for showing mercy through the kindness of a stranger. Help me be worthy of her trust. And Lord, protect her from those who'd do her harm for helping the likes of me. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, witnessing his prayer. While in the main house, Layla finally drifted off to sleep, the lamp burning low beside her bed. Morning crept over the Colorado hills in shades of pewter and slate, the sunrise hidden behind a blanket of clouds that promised rain. Layla stood at her kitchen window, watching the gray light spread across her father's land. The coffee pot bubbled on the stove, its familiar aroma mixing with the scent of frying bacon and biscuits. Through the window, she could see Owen already at work in the yard, his broad shoulders bent as he repaired a broken fence post. He'd been up since before dawn. She'd heard his quiet footsteps on the porch when he'd come to fetch water from the rain barrel. Layla pulled the biscuits from the oven, their golden brown tops still steaming. As she arranged them on a plate, her mind turned to the day ahead. They needed supplies, feed for the livestock, nails for repairs, and lamp oil to see them through the darker evenings that were coming. But going to town meant facing the whispers and stares that had followed yesterday's auction. She squared her shoulders, remembering her father's words. A Caldwell never bows to gossip, daughter. Truth stands taller than talk. Owen looked up at her approach, setting aside the hammer he'd been using. Morning, Miss Caldwell. Good morning, Mr. Reddick. I've brought breakfast. She set the laden plate on the rough wooden table near the corral. We'll need to head into town today for supplies if you're willing. His dark eyes studied her face for a moment before he nodded. Whatever you need, Miss Caldwell. They ate in companionable silence, the morning air cool around them. Owen's presence was solid but unobtrusive, like a mountain that had always been there. When they finished, he insisted on helping her clear away the dishes before hitching up the wagon. The road into town stretched before them like a dusty ribbon, the wagon wheels creaking a steady rhythm. Layla held the reins loosely, aware of Owen's bulk beside her on the seat. His silence felt different today, not tense like yesterday, but watchful, alert. As they approached the town, Layla could see people stopping to stare. Women gathered in clusters on the boardwalk, whispering behind their hands. Men paused in their work, some reaching instinctively for their gun belts before remembering themselves. She pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store, lifting her chin as she climbed down. Owen followed, his movements deliberate and careful, as if trying not to startle anyone. Inside the store, Mr. Peterson's usual friendly greeting was notably absent. He watched Owen with wary eyes as Layla listed their needs. 2 bags of feed, please. And nails. The 3-inch kind. We'll need lamp oil, too. While Mr. Peterson gathered their order, the bell above the door chimed. 3 women from the church society entered, their faces pinched with disapproval. Layla could hear their stage-whispered comments. Did you hear? Bought him right there at auction. Living alone with that man. She's ruined herself, mark my words. Layla's cheeks burned, but she kept her spine straight as she counted out coins for their purchases. Owen stood quietly by the door, his scarred face impassive, but she noticed how he positioned himself between her and the gossiping women. They loaded the supplies into the wagon, working efficiently despite the growing crowd of onlookers. The saloon across the street had begun to fill, and rough voices carried across the dusty street. "Hey, Caldwell girl," a man's voice called out, thick with whiskey despite the early hour. "If you're taking in strays, I got something better to offer than that scarred-up killer." Coarse laughter followed his words. Layla's hands trembled as she secured the last bag of feed, but she refused to acknowledge the taunts. "Best hurry home, girl," another voice jeered. "Before that wild man shows his true nature." Owen's jaw tightened, but he maintained his silence, helping Layla onto the wagon seat with careful hands before climbing up beside her. They had one more stop to make, the hardware store for tools. Layla left Owen with the wagon and slipped down the alley between buildings, taking the shortcut to the back entrance. She was halfway there when 2 men stepped out of the shadows, reeking of cheap whiskey. "Well, look what we got here," the taller one slurred, blocking her path. "The girl who likes dangerous men." "Excuse me," Layla said firmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I need to pass." The second man moved to cut off her retreat. "Maybe we should show you what real men are like, since you're so eager for company." Before either man could take another step, a shadow fell across the alley. Owen stood at its mouth, his massive frame blocking the light. He didn't speak, didn't move, just fixed the men with an iron stare, his scarred jaw set in rigid lines. The change in the drunks was immediate. Their bravado withered under that steady gaze, replaced by something closer to fear. They backed away, stumbling over their own feet in their haste to retreat. "Crazy killer," one muttered as they fled. "Not worth the trouble." Layla stood frozen, her breath coming in quick gasps. Owen remained where he was until the men disappeared around the corner. Then he stepped aside, giving her clear passage back to the street. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, falling into step beside her as they returned to the wagon. The rest of their errands passed in a blur, and soon they were heading home, the afternoon sun trying to break through the gray clouds above. The steady clip-clop of hooves and creak of wheels filled the silence until Layla found her voice again. "Thank you," she said more firmly. "For what you did back there. For handling it the way you did." Owen turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious in his weathered face. When he spoke, his voice was low and gravelly, as if unused to speech. "No one will harm you, Miss Caldwell." Those simple words hung in the air between them as they rode on. Above, the clouds were finally breaking, letting streams of sunlight paint the hills in patches of gold. The wagon creaked beneath them, a homely sound that seemed to underscore the moment's significance. Layla found herself studying Owen's profile as he gazed ahead at the road. The scars that had frightened her yesterday seemed different now. Marks of a life lived hard, perhaps, but not proof of evil. His quiet strength in the alley, the way he'd protected her without raising a hand, spoke of a man who chose his actions carefully. The ranch came into view as they crested the last hill, its weathered buildings painted orange by the setting Sunday. The sight of home eased something in Layla's chest, not just because they were back safe, but because she was beginning to believe she'd made the right choice yesterday at the auction. As they unloaded the wagon in the gathering dusk, their movements fell into an easy rhythm. Owen handled the heavy bags while Layla stored away the smaller items, each accepting the other's role without discussion. The stars were just beginning to peek through breaks in the clouds when they finished, the evening air growing cool around them. The morning sun climbed higher as Layla and Owen worked their way along the north pasture fence line. 4 days had passed since the incident in town, settling into a quiet routine of ranch work. The spring air carried the scent of sage and fresh-turned earth as they moved from post to post, checking for damage from winter storms. Layla paused to wipe her brow, watching Owen work. His massive hands handled the tools with surprising grace, each movement precise and practiced. He lifted a heavy post as though it weighed nothing, setting it perfectly straight in the hole he had dug. "You make that look easy, Mr. Reddick," she said, passing him the level. Owen checked the post's alignment before responding. "Good fence work saves trouble later." His voice was soft but certain, like someone who had learned the lesson firsthand. Layla nodded, holding the post steady while he tamped dirt around its base. There was something familiar about his technique. The way he measured twice before cutting, how he angled the cross pieces just so. It tickled at her memory, reminding her of watching her father work these same fence lines years ago. They worked through the heat of the day, stopping only when the sun hung low on the horizon. Owen gathered the tools while Layla collected the scraps of old wood. The evening air grew cool around them as they walked back to the ranch house. "Supper will be ready soon," Layla said, setting the wood aside for kindling. "Would you care to join me? There's plenty of stew." Owen hesitated, then nodded. "Much obliged, Miss Caldwell." Inside, Layla ladled thick beef stew into bowls while Owen washed up at the pump outside, the kitchen filled with warmth from the cook stove and the rich aroma of herbs from her mother's old recipe. When Owen entered, he removed his hat and waited for her to sit first before taking his place at the table. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the clink of spoons against bowls the only sound. Layla found herself studying Owen's hands, strong and calloused, yet careful with the delicate china bowl, the same hands that had handled fence posts with such familiar skill. "Mr. Reddick," she began, setting down her spoon, "I hope you don't mind my asking, but where did you learn ranch work? You handle everything like—" She paused, searching for words. "Like you've done it all before." "Right here." Owen went still, his spoon hovering above his bowl. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Layla worried she had overstepped. Then he set the spoon down with deliberate care. "I worked these lands before," he said quietly. "With your father." Layla's breath caught. "With Pa?" "When?" "Years back. Before the trouble in the high country." Owen's eyes stayed fixed on the table, We was partners in the timber business, scouting new cuts, marking trees. His voice grew softer. He was a good man, your father. Treated me like family. Layla's mind spun with questions. Why didn't I know? Why didn't Pa ever mention you? Owen's scarred jaw tightened. After what happened up north, the accusations, the manhunt, I asked him not to. Didn't want my reputation touching your family. But what really happened up there? Layla leaned forward, her stew forgotten. Everyone talks, but no one seems to know the truth. Owen's hands clasped together on the table, knuckles white. Timber company wanted land that weren't theirs to take. Your father and I, we found proof they was forging deeds. But before we could bring the evidence to town, he shook his head. Fire took the survey office. 3 men died. Company blamed me, put a price on my head. Your father helped me escape, but my name was ruined. Silence filled the kitchen as Layla absorbed his words. And you've carried that burden alone all these years? Had to. Owen finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. Couldn't risk bringing trouble to you and your father, but I watched over the ranch when I could, from a distance. Made sure no harm came to either of you. Something in his voice made Layla's heart skip. You've been protecting us all this time? Owen's gaze softened. Since you was just a girl, Miss Caldwell, running wild with your braids flying, fearless on that pony of yours. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your father used to say you had more spirit than sense sometimes. Layla felt heat rise in her cheeks. You remember me from back then? Remember everything? Owen's voice dropped lower. Remember wanting to ask your father's blessing to court you proper, once you was grown. But after the trouble, he looked away. A man with my reputation had no right to such dreams. The confession hung in the air between them. Layla's hands trembled as she pushed back from the table. I need some air. She hurried outside, her mind whirling. The evening had grown dark, stars pricking through the purple sky above. Her feet carried her to the barn, where she often went to think when troubled. The familiar smell of hay and leather wrapped around her as she stepped inside. A lantern hung by the door. Layla lit it with shaking hands, letting its glow push back the shadows. As she moved deeper into the barn, the light fell across the main support beam. Ancient wood, worn smooth by time. Something caught her eye. Marks carved into the timber. Layla lifted the lantern higher. There, cut deep into the beam, were 2 sets of initials, TC, for Thomas Caldwell, her father, and beside it, or Owen Reddick. The date below showed they were carved 15 years ago, back when the barn was first raised. Her free hand traced the letters, feeling the truth of Owen's words in every groove. This was no random meeting, no chance purchase at auction. Owen had been part of their lives, part of their ranch, long before she truly knew him. And he had loved her, silently and from afar, while carrying the weight of his ruined name. Later that night, Layla knelt beside her bed, hands clasped in prayer. The moonlight streaming through her window painted silver patterns on the quilt, the last one her mother had made, now back in its place since she hadn't needed to sell it after all. Lord, she whispered, I don't know what to think. Owen's past, his connection to Pa, his feelings. She pressed her forehead against her joined hands. I was so sure I knew what I was doing when I bought his contract, but now, everything's different. He's different. Her heart felt pulled in too many directions, fear of the unknown, warring with growing compassion, uncertainty about the future tangled with a deep sense that Owen's arrival was no accident. The love he admitted to both thrilled and frightened her. Give me wisdom, she prayed. Show me the path you want me to take. The quiet of the house settled around her, broken only by the distant cry of a coyote. Somewhere out in the bunkhouse, Owen was probably praying too, the gentle giant who had watched over her family for so many years, who had sacrificed his own happiness to protect them. Layla climbed into bed, her mind still churning with all she had learned. The carved initials in the barn, her father's trust in Owen, the years of silent guardianship, it all pointed to something deeper than chance. Whether it was destiny or divine providence, she couldn't say. But as sleep finally claimed her, one truth remained clear. Owen Reddick was far more than the scarred outlaw she had impulsively purchased at auction. He was, perhaps, exactly where he belonged. Morning light spilled across the ranch yard as Layla stepped out onto the porch, cradling a steaming cup of coffee. The air held the crisp bite of early autumn, and dew sparkled on the grass like scattered diamonds. From the barn came the rhythmic sound of Owen splitting wood, a task he had taken up without being asked, just like so many others. The steady thunk of the axe stopped abruptly. Layla looked up to see Owen standing straight, his attention fixed on the road leading to the ranch. A cloud of dust approached, and within minutes, a rider emerged from the haze. The familiar glint of a deputy's badge caught the sunlight. Layla set down her coffee cup and descended the porch steps, her heart quickening. Deputy Morris pulled his horse to a stop, his young face pinched with discomfort. He barely glanced at Owen, who had moved closer, axe still in hand. "Miss Caldwell," the deputy touched the brim of his hat. "Got a message from Sheriff Granger." "What kind of message?" Layla kept her voice steady, though her hands wanted to tremble. Morris shifted in his saddle. "Sheriff says to warn you proper like. Says keeping that one," he jerked his head toward Owen, "is liable to bring nothing but trouble to your door." Owen remained silent, but Layla felt his presence behind her like a solid wall. "Is that a threat, deputy?" "Just passing along what I was told to say." Morris fidgeted with his reins. "But there's talk in town, Miss Caldwell. Railroad men been asking questions about your land, and some folks remember how Reddick stood with them Ute families when the timber company tried claiming their hunting grounds." The pieces clicked into place. Owen's earlier confession about the timber company, the false accusations, the fire. Layla lifted her chin. "Thank you for delivering your message, deputy. Is there anything else?" Morris glanced nervously between Layla and Owen. "Just be careful, Miss Caldwell. Sheriff ain't one to make idle warnings." He turned his horse, eager to be gone. "Good day to you." They watched until the deputy disappeared back into the dust cloud. Only then did Layla release the breath she'd been holding. She turned to find Owen studying her, his dark eyes troubled. "Miss Caldwell," he said softly, "perhaps it would be best if I moved on. Your ranch? No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "This is my ranch, and who I keep here is my business." She smoothed her skirts, trying to calm her racing thoughts. "Besides, there's work to be done. The gate on the south cattle pen needs mending before sundown." Owen's expression softened slightly. "Yes, ma'am." They spent the day in their usual routine, Layla tending to the chickens and garden while Owen repaired fences and chopped wood. But the deputy's warning hung over them like a thundercloud, charging the air with unspoken tension. As evening approached, they made their way to the broken gate. The setting sun painted the sky in fierce oranges and deep purples, casting long shadows across the cattle pen. Owen worked methodically, his strong hands measuring and cutting replacement boards while Layla held them steady. "Sheriff Granger?" Owen said suddenly, breaking their comfortable silence. "He's the reason I ended up in chains." Layla paused in her work. "What do you mean?" Owen lined up another board, his movements precise despite the failing light. "After the timber company fire, I went into hiding in the high country. Lived peaceful with the Ute for near 2 years. He drove in a nail with 3 sure strikes. Then Granger tracked me down, said he had evidence clearing my name. But it was a trap," Layla guessed, her heart sinking. Owen nodded. "Walked right into it. Should have known better. Granger's been in the railroad's pocket for years." Another nail went in. They wanted to make an example of me. Show what happens to folks who stand against progress, as they call it. Layla watched his face in the dying light, seeing the weight of those years in every line and scar. The Ute families you helped, what happened to them? Most moved north, after the company took their land. Owen's jaw tightened. Your father, he tried to help them too, offered grazing rights on Caldwell land, but the railroad had other plans. And now they want our ranch. Layla's voice came out barely above a whisper. Owen set down his hammer, turning to face her fully. Miss Caldwell, I need you to understand what keeping me here means. These men, they don't stop until they get what they want, and they want your land. The last rays of sunlight caught his face, softening the harsh lines of his scars. Layla studied him. This man who had endured so much, yet still carried himself with quiet dignity. In his eyes, she saw no trace of the murderous outlaw the town feared, only steadfast determination and something deeper, something that made her heart flutter. I understand exactly what it means, she said firmly. It means I'm harboring an innocent man who stood up against theft and corruption. It means I'm choosing what's right over what's easy. She stepped closer, her voice growing stronger. My father taught me that a ranch isn't just land and cattle. It's a testament to what we believe in. And I believe in you, Owen Reddick. Owen stood very still, his expression raw with emotion. Layla, he breathed, using her given name for the first time. Then he caught himself, stepping back. Miss Caldwell, I mean. You honor me with your trust, but I can't bear the thought of you losing everything because of me. I'm not losing anything, Layla replied. I'm gaining an ally, someone who knows the truth about what the railroad and timber company did, someone who can help me fight them. She gestured to the gate they'd been mending. Look at what we've accomplished, together just today. This ranch needs both of us. The last light faded from the sky, leaving them in the soft gray of dusk. A cool breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. In the gathering darkness, Owen's presence felt solid and reassuring. Not a threat to her ranch, but its potential salvation. We should finish this gate before full dark, Owen said finally, his voice rough with emotion. But as he picked up his hammer again, Layla saw the ghost of a smile touch his lips. They worked together in companionable silence, the sound of hammering punctuated by the lowing of cattle and the first evening songs of crickets. Each blow that secured the gate felt like a declaration. They would face whatever came together, standing firm against the forces that sought to drive them apart. When the gate hung true at last, Layla tested its swing. Good work, she said, patting the solid wood. It'll hold. Yes, Owen agreed quietly, and Layla knew he wasn't just talking about the gate. It'll hold. They gathered their tools as the first stars appeared overhead. The weight of the sheriff's warning still pressed on Layla's shoulders, but it felt lighter somehow, shared between them. She had tied her life to a man hunted by powerful enemies, yet watching Owen's careful movements, seeing his gentle strength and unwavering integrity, she knew she had made the right choice. The ranch house windows glowed warmly in the distance, beckoning them home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, they had this moment of peace, a mended gate, a cooling evening, and the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they needed to be. The days settled into a steady rhythm at the Caldwell Ranch, each sunrise bringing new tasks and quiet understanding between Layla and Owen. He worked from dawn to dusk, his massive frame moving with surprising grace through the daily chores that kept the ranch alive. Monday morning found Owen at the well, muscles straining as he hauled bucket after bucket of fresh water. The wooden handle creaked under his grip, drops catching the early light as they splashed into the waiting trough. Layla watched from the kitchen window, kneading bread dough with flour-dusted hands. There was something mesmerizing about his methodical movement, like a pendulum marking time. By Tuesday, Owen had turned his attention to the woodpile. The sharp crack of his axe echoed across the yard, each stroke precise and powerful. Stacks of split pine grew steadily beside the house, enough to last through many cold nights ahead. When Layla brought him water at midday, She noticed how he'd arranged the wood just as her father used to the driest pieces nearest the door, the green wood set aside to season. Wednesday brought the challenge of the leaking roof. Owen climbed up with tools and tar paper, working carefully above the kitchen where rain had been seeping through. His boots found sure purchase on the steep pitch as he replaced damaged shingles. Layla steadied the ladder below, handing up supplies when he called for them. His voice, though rarely used, had grown softer when speaking to her, less gruff, almost gentle. They rode the fence lines together on Thursday and Friday, checking for breaks and loose wire. Owen taught her to spot signs she'd never noticed before, where cattle had pushed through, where posts were starting to rot beneath the soil. His knowledge of the land ran deep, and Layla found herself learning the ranch anew through his eyes. "My father taught you well," she remarked, as they paused to repair a sagging section. Owen nodded, holding the wire taut while she hammered. "He was a good man, patient teacher." He glanced at her briefly, like his daughter. The words warmed her, but they couldn't entirely chase away the chill of what awaited in town. Each trip for supplies became an exercise in holding her head high, while pretending not to notice the changing attitudes of people she'd known all her life. At the general store, Mrs. Peterson pulled her youngest daughter closer when Layla passed, as though wildness might be catching. The Cooper sisters, who'd been her friends since childhood, suddenly found their shopping needed doing at different hours. Behind raised fans and in shadowed doorways, whispers followed her path. Poor foolish girl, throwing herself away on that savage. No decent man will have her now, just like her mother, too soft-hearted for her own good. The young men of the town, who once might have tipped their hats or offered to carry her packages, now turned away. Tommy Fletcher, who'd been on the verge of courting her properly, crossed the street rather than face her directly. His father's words carried clearly across the dust. "No son of mine will mix with a woman who keeps company with killers." Saturday's trip proved especially difficult. Layla needed yard goods for mending, and the mercantile was crowded with weekend shoppers. Conversations died as she entered, then resumed in fierce whispers. She kept her spine straight, choosing her fabric with deliberate care while feeling the weight of judging eyes. Behind her, Sally Mae Wilson's voice carried with deliberate clarity. "I heard he murdered 3 men before they caught him. Burned down a whole logging camp, too. Mark my words, she'll be found dead in her bed one morning." Layla's hands trembled as she paid for her purchase, but she met the shopkeeper's wary gaze steadily. Outside, Owen waited with the wagon, his broad shoulders tense. He'd heard every word she could tell by the tight set of his jaw. "They don't know you," she said softly as they drove home. "They know enough." His knuckles whitened on the reins. "Perhaps it would be better if—" "No." She cut him off firmly. "We've had that discussion." Sunday morning dawned clear and cool. Layla dressed with extra care in her blue calico dress, the one her mother had sewn for her last Christmas. When she stepped outside, she found Owen waiting by the wagon, clean-shaven, and wearing his one good shirt. The sight caught her breath. He looked almost handsome, his scars less fierce without the shadow of beard. They rode to church together, the wagon wheels raising dust that gilded the morning air. Owen's presence beside her felt solid, grounding, even as her stomach fluttered with anticipation of the reception they'd receive. The little white church stood bright against the sky, its steeple reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing the way. As they approached, the usual gathering of congregants on the steps grew silent. People parted like water around a stone, drawing back as Owen helped Layla down from the wagon. Inside, the quiet grew deeper. Fans stopped fluttering. Children were pulled closer. The rustle of skirts and scrape of boots marked a subtle exodus from nearby pews, leaving an empty circle around them. Layla felt each movement like a physical blow, but she kept her eyes forward, focusing on the cross above the altar. Preacher Tomlin's sermon that morning centered on mercy, though his voice quavered slightly whenever his gaze crossed their pew. "Even the least among us deserves God's grace," he intoned. "For who are we to judge another's heart? Layla clung to those words, letting them sink deep into her soul. Beside her, Owen sat perfectly still, his huge frame somehow managing to look humble in the narrow pew. She noticed his lips moving silently during prayers, though he didn't join in the hymns. The ride home stretched quiet under the climbing Sunday birds wheeled overhead, their cries carrying across the open range. Near the creek crossing, Owen finally spoke. "Been many years since I sat in a proper church." His voice was rough with emotion. "Used to pray regular when I was younger, even after everything. But lately," he trailed off, struggling with words that seemed to catch in his throat. "Lately?" Layla prompted gently. "Lately, I wonder if heaven remembers me at all." The admission came out barely above a whisper. "If there's any point in asking forgiveness when you've fallen so far." Layla's heart ached at the despair in his voice. She thought of all she'd seen this past week, his careful handling of new-laid eggs, how he'd moved a nest of baby rabbits to safety before clearing brush, the gentle way he spoke to her nervous mare. These were not the actions of a man beyond redemption. "He remembers every soul," she said softly, the words carrying absolute conviction. "Every single one." Owen's hands tightened on the reins, then slowly relaxed. They drove on in silence, but something had shifted between them like a door cracking open to let in light. That evening, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of promise, Layla stood on the porch watching Owen lead the horses to pasture. His movements were sure and peaceful, a man comfortable with his place in the world despite everything aligned against him. Her reputation in town might be tarnished, but her faith felt stronger than ever. Sometimes, she realized, doing right meant walking a lonely road. The sound of evening prayer drifted from the bunkhouse later. Owen's deep voice carried on the cooling air, no longer quite so heavy with doubt. Layla smiled and added her own quiet amen before heading inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, this was enough. Work done well, prayers offered honestly, and the slow healing of a wounded soul. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when Owen appeared at the ranch house door, 2 saddled horses in tow. After days of mending fences and hauling water, his suggestion of a ride caught Layla by surprise. "There's a place I'd like to show you, Miss Caldwell," he said, his voice carrying its usual careful respect. "If you're willing." Layla studied him, noting how the early light softened his scars. A week ago, such an invitation might have sparked fear. Now, she found herself nodding, without hesitation. "Let me fetch my shawl." Owen had chosen her father's favorite trail horse for her, a gentle bay mare named Sugar. His own mount was the rangy Mustang he'd been working with, a creature as weathered and scarred as himself. Both horses stood quietly, reins gathered neatly, saddles properly cinched. His attention to detail touched her. He'd even remembered to tie on her mother's old blanket roll, just in case the mountain air turned cool. They set out as the dew still sparkled on the grass, heading toward the rising Sunday. Owen led them away from the usual ranch paths, following game trails that wound steadily upward through stands of aspen and pine. Sugar's hooves made soft sounds in the needles, while birds called morning greetings from the branches above. The climb was steady but gentle. Owen kept to a pace that allowed them to ride side by side when the trail widened, though he remained silent for the most part. Layla found she didn't mind the quiet. There was something peaceful about moving through the morning with him, watching how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert but not tense. After about an hour, the trees began to thin. Suddenly they crested a ridge, and Layla's breath caught in her throat. Before them stretched a hidden meadow, cupped in the mountain's palm like a green jewel. Wildflowers dotted the grass in swaths of purple, yellow, and white, swaying in the gentle breeze. A clear stream wound through its heart, catching sunlight like scattered diamonds. "Oh," she whispered, overwhelmed by the beauty. Owen's voice was soft with reverence. "Your father showed me this place years ago, said it was special to him. I remember him talking about a meadow high up, Layla said, memories stirring. He'd come here to think sometimes, but he never brought me. Said he was waiting for the right time. They dismounted at the meadow's edge, letting the horses crop the sweet grass while keeping their reins loose in hand. Owen led the way to the stream, his boots making no sound in the thick grass. At the water's edge, he paused. The Ute people called this sacred ground, he explained, gesturing to the surrounding peaks. They said the Creator spoke clearer up here, where wind and water meet the sky. He glanced at her, something vulnerable in his expression. Your father understood that. He'd pray here sometimes. Layla knelt beside the stream, trailing her fingers in the crystal water. It feels different here, she admitted. Closer to heaven, somehow. Owen nodded, lowering himself to sit on a sun-warmed rock nearby. His massive frame seemed to settle into the landscape naturally, like he belonged. After a moment's hesitation, he spoke again. Been meaning to ask if you'd pray with me, Miss Caldwell. Seems right to do it here, where your father did. The request touched her deeply. She remembered his whispered prayers from the bunkhouse, how he'd bowed his head at her table that first night. I'd be honored, she said softly. They sat quiet by the singing stream, heads bowed in the morning light. Owen's deep voice carried gently across the water as he asked for courage. Courage to face what was coming, courage to be worthy of trust given. Layla added her own prayers for guidance and protection, not just for herself but for the scarred man beside her who seemed less frightening with each passing day. As their words faded into the mountain air, a profound peace settled over Layla. The last traces of fear that had haunted her since the auction melted away like morning mist. Here, in this sacred place, she saw Owen clearly not as property bought with her mother's quilt money, but as a man of quiet strength and hidden grace. They spent the morning exploring the meadow, Owen pointing out medicinal plants the Ute had taught him about. He showed her columbine nodding in the shade, yarrow standing proud in sunny patches, and tiny wild strawberries hiding under their leaves. His knowledge flowed naturally, without pride or pretense. When the sun reached its peak, they settled in a shady spot near the stream. Owen produced jerky from his saddlebag, offering her the choicest pieces with a gesture that reminded her of sharing bread at communion. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the water's song and the whisper of wind in the grass. The afternoon passed in gentle moments. Layla gathered wildflowers while Owen told her stories of working these mountains with her father. His words painted pictures of two men riding the high country, sharing coffee under starlight, learning to trust each other despite the world's judgments. She began to understand why her father had valued Owen's friendship, and why losing it must have grieved him deeply. As evening approached, Owen built a small fire, keeping it low and controlled. The flames cast warm light on their faces as shadows lengthened across the meadow. He offered her more jerky for supper, along with some hard biscuits he'd thoughtfully packed. The simple meal tasted better than any fancy dinner in town. Thank you, Layla said as she watched the first stars appear above the peaks, for sharing this place with me. Owen's response was quiet but clear. Your father wanted you to know it. Reckon he'd be pleased you're here now. The ride home unfolded under a canopy of stars, their horses picking their way carefully down the darkened trail. Owen led them true, though Layla could hardly see the path ahead. The night was soft around them, filled with the sounds of crickets and the occasional call of an owl. At one point, the trail narrowed between two boulders. Their horses drew close together, and Layla felt Owen's shoulder brush against hers. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, different from fear or uncertainty. When their eyes met in the starlight, she saw her own trust reflected in his gaze. By the time they reached the ranch, the moon had risen full and bright. As Owen helped her down from Sugar's back, Layla realized something had shifted during their day in the meadow. She no longer thought of him as the man she'd bought at auction, nor as someone to fear or pity. Somewhere between the morning's prayers and evening's quiet ride, he had become simply Owen, her equal, perhaps even her friend. They untacked the horses together, their movements falling into natural rhythm. No words were needed as they brushed the animals down and made sure they had fresh water for the night. Only when the stable work was finished did Owen speak. "Sleep well, Miss Caldwell," he said, touching his hat brim with the same respect he'd always shown. Yet somehow different now. More genuine, perhaps, more earned. "Good night, Owen," she replied, and saw something soften in his expression at the simple use of his name. As Layla walked to the house under the star-filled sky, she felt a deep sense of rightness settle in her heart. The day had been a gift, not just the beautiful meadow or shared prayers, but the quiet understanding that had grown between them. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she would face them differently now. Her father had been right about the meadow's power, she thought as she prepared for bed. Some places could change how you saw the world and the people in it. She fell asleep with the memory of wildflowers and sacred ground swirling in her dreams, and the lingering warmth of a shoulder brushed in starlight. Thunder rumbled in the distance, rolling across the valley like drums in the night sky. Layla lay in her bed, listening as the wind picked up, rattling the shutters of her bedroom window. The air felt heavy with coming rain, thick with the promise of a storm. A flash of lightning illuminated her room, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the house. In that brief, bright moment, she caught sight of dark clouds massing over the mountains, their edges silver in the moonlight. The storm was moving fast, bearing down on the ranch with growing fury. Rain began to fall, first as scattered drops that pattered against the roof, then in sheets that drummed steadily overhead. Layla pulled her quilt tighter, remembering how her father used to say that cattle grew restless during storms. The memory had barely formed when she heard it, the distant bawling of the herd, their voices carrying through the rain. Another flash lit the sky, closer now, and the thunder that followed was deafening. The cattle's cries grew more intense, panic threading through their calls. Layla sat up, worry creeping into her heart. The herd was in the north pasture. Nearly 200 head gathered there for the late summer grazing. Suddenly, a shout cut through the storm's fury. Boots pounded across the porch, and Owen's voice rang out urgent and clear. "Miss Caldwell, rustlers." Layla was moving before conscious thought, pulling on her boots and shrugging into her father's old oilskin coat. She grabbed the large barn lantern from beside her bed, hands steady despite her racing heart. When she reached the front door, she found Owen already mounted on his horse, rifle gleaming wet in the darkness. "Stay close to the house," he called down to her, his voice carrying above the wind. "We'll need light to work by." Before she could respond, more shouts echoed from the direction of the herd. Several riders moved like shadows through the rain, their forms visible only when lightning flashed. The cattle's panic had reached a fever pitch, their thundering hooves adding to the storm's chaos. Owen spurred his horse toward the commotion, the rifle held ready but not yet raised. Layla's heart caught in her throat as she watched him ride into danger. She held the lantern high, its flame steady despite the wind, creating a beacon of light in the darkness. A shot cracked through the night, sharp and distinct from the thunder. Layla couldn't tell where it came from, but she saw Owen's figure pause at the edge of the herd. He raised his rifle, and for a moment she feared what would follow. But instead of aiming at the rustlers, he fired high into the air, once, twice, 3 times in quick succession. The warning shots echoed across the valley. Through the curtain of rain, Layla saw the rustlers' horses rear and wheel. Owen's voice boomed out, powerful as the thunder itself. "This land is protected. Clear out, or the next shots won't be warnings." More lightning illuminated the scene. The cattle had begun to bunch together, moving in a tight circle as they'd been trained to do in times of stress. Owen rode the edges of the herd, firing occasional warning shots into the air. The rustlers' shadows grew fainter, retreating into the storm's darkness. Rain lashed at Layla's face as she maintained her position, holding the lantern steady. She watched Owen work, marveling at how he handled both horse and rifle with skill that spoke of long experience. Yet he never once aimed to harm, only to warn and protect. The storm raged on, but gradually the crisis passed. The rustlers vanished into the night, leaving only hoofprints in the mud as evidence of their attempt. The cattle, responding to Owen's steady presence, began to settle. Their panicked bawling softened to occasional lows of distress, then to silence broken only by the storm's voice. Dawn approached slowly, the sky lightening from black to gray. The rain gentled to a steady drizzle, and the thunder moved off to the east, growling its way over the mountains. Owen made one final circle of the herd before turning back toward the house, his horse walking wearily through the mud. Layla met him at the porch, holding the door open. He dismounted stiffly, water streaming from his hat and coat. "The herd's safe," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Not a head lost." Inside, Layla stirred up the stove's embers and set coffee to boil while Owen removed his dripping coat. She noticed how his hands shook slightly as he set the rifle carefully in its rack, not from fear, she realized, but from the night's effort and the cold rain. "You protected them without bloodshed," she said softly, pouring the coffee into 2 tin cups. Owen accepted his cup with a grateful nod, his scarred hands wrapping around the warm metal. "Violence breeds violence," he said after a long moment. "Your father taught me that," said a man who reaches first for his gun has already lost something precious. They sat in comfortable silence at the kitchen table, steam rising from their cups as the gray dawn crept in through the windows. Layla studied Owen's face in the growing light, the strong lines softened by weariness, the scars that spoke of harder times, the gentle way he held his cup despite hands that could easily bend iron. "You could have shot them," she observed. "Most men would have." Owen shook his head slowly. "Shooting men doesn't protect land or cattle. It just brings more trouble, more blood. Better to show strength through mercy." He paused, looking into his coffee as if seeing something far away. "Your father understood that. He gave me the same chance once, when others would have shot first." The room grew lighter as the storm clouds parted, allowing the first real rays of morning sun to filter through. Outside, they could hear the cattle moving peacefully in their pasture, the crisis forgotten in the way of animals. The ranch had weathered the night's threat, protected not by violence but by steady courage. Owen raised his eyes to meet Layla's gaze. Despite his exhaustion, there was a warmth there that touched her heart. "Your father would be proud of you," he said softly, standing strong through the storm, keeping the light steady for those who needed it. Layla felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were grateful tears. She reached across the table and touched Owen's hand briefly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me that strength can be gentle." They finished their coffee as the sun rose fully, turning, the rain-washed world to gold. The night's danger had passed, but something precious remained. A deeper understanding of the man who had once been seen as dangerous, now revealed as a true steward of the land and its people. Looking at Owen's weathered face in the morning light, Layla saw no trace of the savage man townsfolk whispered about. Instead, she saw someone who had learned the harder path of mercy, who chose to protect rather than destroy. In that moment, she knew her father's faith in him had been well placed, and so was hers. The morning after the storm dawned clear and crisp, with puddles dotting the rutted road into town. Layla checked their list one more time. Salt and flour had run low, and after the night's excitement, they needed more coffee too. Owen hitched the horses to the wagon while she counted out their meager funds, tucking the money carefully into her skirt pocket. The wagon creaked as Owen helped her up onto the seat. His hands were strong but gentle, and she noticed how he took care not to grip too tightly. They set out just as the sun cleared the eastern ridge, the horses' hooves splashing through the rain-filled potholes. "Reckon we'll make good time today," Layla said, trying to sound cheerful despite her underlying nervousness about facing the town. The last visit had been tense enough, But after the rumors about the rustlers, she worried the mood might have soured further. Owen nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He sat beside her on the wagon seat, a respectful distance between them, but his presence felt solid and reassuring. The morning light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, and Layla found herself studying his profile. The strong jaw, the scars that spoke of hard years, the quiet dignity in his bearing. As they approached town, the usual bustle of morning activity seemed to freeze. Folks stopped in their tracks, staring openly now rather than stealing glances. A group of men lounging outside the saloon straightened up, their faces hard with hostility. One of them spat deliberately in the dirt as the wagon passed. Layla felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her chin high. Owen guided the horses steadily down the main street, seemingly unaffected by the cold reception. They pulled up in front of the general store, and he helped her down from the wagon with the same careful courtesy he had shown that morning. The store's bell jangled as they entered, and old Mr. Peterson looked up from his ledger. His usually friendly face turned to stone when he saw Owen's towering figure in the doorway. Layla stepped forward, list in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson. We need 20 pounds of flour, and price has gone up." Peterson cut her off, his voice sharp. "Flour's twice what it was last week." Layla blinked. "But surely, take it or leave it." He smirked, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "Times are hard, especially for those keeping questionable company." Owen remained silent behind her, but she could feel the tension in his stillness. Layla took a deep breath, remembering her father's teachings about dignity in the face of meanness. "Very well," she said evenly. "We'll take 10 pounds instead of 20. She watched Peterson weigh out the flour, noting how he pressed his thumb on the scale. The salt, too, came at an inflated price, but she paid without comment, though her heart ached at their dwindling funds. Outside, they encountered Mrs. Bradford and her sewing circle heading to the church. These were women who had once welcomed Layla warmly, who had brought food when her father died. Now they turned their backs as one, their skirts swishing against the boardwalk as they hurried past. The blacksmith, Mr. Johnson, stood in his doorway as they loaded the supplies. He had been her father's friend once, but his face was dark with disapproval as he approached the wagon. "Layla girl," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You're ruining yourself, keeping him out there. Ain't natural, ain't right. A young woman alone with—" He glanced at Owen and didn't finish the thought. "Mr. Johnson," Layla replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I thank you for your concern, but my choices are my own. Your father would never—" "My father," she cut in, surprising herself with her firmness, "taught me to judge people by their actions, not by gossip." More townspeople had gathered, watching the exchange. Owen finished loading the last sack and climbed up beside her, his movements deliberate and calm. As they pulled away, Layla heard multiple voices muttering, their words carrying clearly in the morning air, shame and ruined, and that poor girl's lost her mind. They were well out of town before Layla's hand stopped shaking on the quadr reins. The unfairness of it all suddenly overwhelmed her, and words burst forth like water from a broken dam. "How dare they?" she exclaimed. "Those same people who came to our table, who called my father friend. They don't know you, haven't seen how you work, how you protected the herd without violence. They just assume and judge and—" She had to stop, her throat too tight to continue. Owen listened quietly, his presence steady beside her as the wagon rattled along the familiar road home. When her words finally ran out, he spoke softly, his deep voice gentle as summer rain. "Strength is not always fists, Layla. Sometimes it is standing still while the storm blows." She turned to look at him, struck by the wisdom in those words. His eyes met hers briefly, and she saw in them not anger at the town's treatment, but a deep understanding that somehow made her own anger feel smaller. The rest of the ride passed in companionable silence. The shadows were lengthening when they finally pulled up to the ranch house. Owen insisted on unloading the supplies himself, carrying them into the kitchen with careful efficiency. Layla lit the lamps as dusk settled in, their warm glow making the kitchen feel like a sanctuary after the day's trials. Later that night, after Owen had retired to the bunkhouse, Layla sat at her father's old desk. She pulled out her journal, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. The lamp cast a gentle light as she dipped her pen and began to write. "Today tested my courage in ways I never expected," she wrote, the words flowing steadily across the page. The town showed its true colors, and they were not pretty. But somehow, watching Owen's quiet dignity in the face of their cruelty taught me more than all their years of false friendship. He teaches me more than I imagined, about strength, about patience, about standing firm when the world tries to push you down. She paused, watching a moth flutter against the lamp glass, and added, "Perhaps this is what Father saw in him all those years ago. Not just a strong back for ranch work, but a soul of rare quality, wrapped in scars that only make the light within shine brighter." Setting down her pen, Layla looked out the window toward the bunkhouse. A single lamp still burned there, its glow a warm beacon in the darkness. She thought about Owen's words about standing still in the storm, and felt a deeper understanding settle in her heart. Sometimes the greatest courage was simply remaining true to what you believed, no matter how others might judge. The first winter winds whistled through the eaves of the Caldwell Ranch house, carrying the promise of snow. Layla stood at the kitchen window, watching dark clouds roll across the late afternoon sky. The temperature had dropped sharply since morning, and already she could see her breath misting against the glass. Inside, the house was warm and snug. The cooking stove radiated welcome heat, and the familiar scent of wood smoke drifted from the sitting room fireplace where Owen had built up a strong blaze. These evening hours had become a quiet ritual as autumn deepened into winter, a time when the day's work was done and the night's chill drove them indoors to share the comfort of firelight and company. Layla gathered her mending basket and settled into her father's old leather chair near the hearth. Owen sat on the wooden bench he'd built himself, his large hands working steadily at a set of worn leather reins. The firelight caught the silver threading through his dark hair and cast dancing shadows on the wall behind him. "These'll need oiling after the stitching's done," he said, holding the reins up to examine his work. His voice was soft but carried easily in the quiet room. Layla nodded, threading her needle to patch a tear in one of her work shirts. "There's some neat's foot oil in Father's old trunk. He always said it was best for leather." "Your father knew his craft," Owen agreed. His fingers moved with surprising delicacy for such large hands, making neat, even stitches in the weathered leather. The fire crackled companionably as they worked. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Layla glanced at the family Bible, resting on the small table between them. It had become their custom to read a passage each evening, finding comfort and guidance in the familiar words. "Would you read tonight?" she asked, noting how Owen's expression softened at the request. He carefully set aside his work and picked up the Bible, handling it with reverence. His fingers, scarred and rough from years of labor, turned the pages with gentle care. The lamplight fell across his hands, and Layla found her attention drawn to the web of pale lines that crossed his skin. As if sensing her gaze, Owen paused. "You're wondering about the scars," he said quietly, not looking up from the Bible. Layla hesitated, not wanting to pry into painful memories. "You don't have to tell me," she offered. "No," he said, closing the Bible but keeping his place with one finger. "You should know. It wasn't barroom brawls or outlaw work that marked these hands." His voice grew distant, as though seeing into the past. "It was up in the high country, 4 years back. The railroad was pushing through, cutting timber where they had no right. There were Ute families who'd hunted those grounds for generations." Layla leaned forward, her mending forgotten in her lap. She had heard whispers about Owen's time in the mountains, but never the full truth. "The railroad men came with torches one night," Owen continued, his voice low but steady. meant to drive the families out, burn them off their own land. I couldn't stand by, got these scars pulling children from a burning lodge, trying to save what I could of their winter stores. Tears pricked at Layla's eyes as Owen turned his hand's palm up, showing the rope burns and fire scars that crossed them. The railroad men didn't take kindly to interference, branded me an outlaw, put a price on my head, but I couldn't do different. Not and still call myself a man of faith. You risked everything to help them, Layla whispered, understanding now why the native people in the territory spoke Owen's name with respect. He nodded once, then opened the Bible again. Your father understood. He gave me work when others wouldn't, trusted me when the sheriff was calling me dangerous. His voice grew rough with emotion. That's why I couldn't let those rustlers take your cattle. This land, this ranch, it's part of your father's legacy of doing right, no matter the cost. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, dusting the window panes with white. Owen began to read from Psalms, his deep voice filling the room with ancient words of courage and faith. Layla wiped her eyes, her heart full of a new understanding of this man who had once seemed so frightening. The days grew shorter as winter settled in properly. Snow drifts piled against the barn, and the cattle huddled in the sheltered pastures. But inside the ranch house, warmth and quiet companionship flourished. Each evening brought its own peaceful rhythm. Owen, splitting wood to keep the fires fed, Layla cooking hearty stews and fresh bread, then both of them gathering by the hearth to work and talk. Owen proved to be a good listener, drawing out stories of Layla's childhood on the ranch with gentle questions. She found herself sharing memories she'd almost forgotten, her mother teaching her to make soap, her father showing her how to read weather in the clouds. In return, Owen slowly revealed more of his own past, years spent as a timber scout, learning the mountain's secrets, and the deep respect he'd developed for the native people who taught him their ways. As Christmas Eve approached, the ranch house took on a festive air despite their modest means. Layla hung pine boughs over the mantel, their fresh scent mixing with wood smoke. She spent the afternoon in the kitchen, humming old hymns as she mixed cornbread batter, her mother's special recipe, saved for holidays. Owen came in from the barn, bringing a blast of cold air with him. He stamped the snow from his boots and hung his heavy coat by the door. "Smells like heaven in here," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a rare smile. "Mother's cornbread," Layla explained, sliding the pan into the oven. "She always made it for Christmas Eve." She straightened up, brushing flour from her apron. "Would you like to help me set the table? We'll use the good plates tonight." Together they laid out the small feast, cornbread still steaming from the oven, the last of the summer preserves, some dried apple slices Owen had traded for in town. The lamp cast a golden glow over the table, making even their simple fare look special. Before they sat down, Owen cleared his throat. "Miss Caldwell, Layla," he corrected himself, using her first name with careful respect. "Would you mind if we sang a hymn? It's been years since I celebrated Christmas proper, but I remember the old songs." Layla's heart warmed at the request. "Of course. Which one?" "Silent Night," he suggested. "My mother taught it to me when I was young." They stood together by the fireplace, and Owen's deep voice joined with Layla's clear one, filling the room with the familiar melody. The lamp flickered, casting their shadows on the wall, no longer separate shapes but merged into one pattern of light and darkness. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. As they sang, Layla felt something shift in her heart, a recognition of how much had changed since that dusty day at the auction. The man beside her, once feared and whispered about, had become her anchor in these winter months. His quiet strength, his gentle faith, his careful consideration of her comfort and safety, all of it spoke of a soul far different from what town gossip claimed. The hymn ended, its last notes fading into the crackling of the fire. Snow fell softly outside the windows, and the wind had died down to a whisper. In the warm lamplight, Layla caught Owen watching her with an expression of such tender regard that her breath caught in her throat. They sat down to their Christmas Eve supper, bowing their heads as Owen offered a prayer of thanks. The cornbread was perfect, golden and sweet, just as her mother used to make. They ate slowly, savoring each bite, sharing comfortable silence broken only by the occasional appreciative comment or passed plate. Later, as Owen banked the fire for the night before heading out to the bunkhouse, Layla realized she felt something she hadn't experienced since before her father's death: true contentment. This Christmas Eve, despite its simplicity, had brought an unfamiliar happiness. The man she had purchased out of desperate compassion had become something precious to her, though she hardly dared name the feeling growing in her heart. "Thank you," she said softly as Owen reached for his coat. "For the hymn, for everything." He paused at the door, his eyes meeting hers with quiet intensity. "Merry Christmas, Layla," he replied, his voice gentle. Then he was gone, his footsteps crunching in the snow as he made his way to the bunkhouse. Layla stood at the window, watching until his lamp glowed steady through the bunkhouse window. The night was still, the world hushed under its blanket of snow. She touched the glass, cool against her fingers, and smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of shared work, quiet conversations, and the steady building of something neither of them had expected to find. The morning after Christmas dawned crisp and clear, the sun glinting off fresh snow like scattered diamonds. Layla woke early, her heart light despite the cold. The past weeks had brought an unexpected peace to the ranch, a gentle rhythm of shared work and quiet companionship that made even the hardest days bearable. She kindled the kitchen stove, humming softly as she measured coffee grounds. Through the window, she could see Owen already at work, his broad shoulders moving steadily as he broke ice from the cattle trough. Steam rose from the horse's nostrils in the crystal air, and the world seemed clean and new. The coffee had just begun to bubble when the first drumbeat of hooves shattered the morning quiet. Layla's hand froze on the coffee pot. The sound grew louder, not one horse but many, riding hard and fast toward the ranch. Her heart jumped into her throat as she rushed to the door, throwing it open just as Sheriff Granger and 6 deputies thundered into the yard, their horses' hooves churning the pristine snow into muddy slush. "Owen Reddick!" the sheriff bellowed, his voice cutting through the crisp air. "Show yourself, murderer." Owen straightened slowly from his work at the trough, his face grave but calm. "Sheriff," he acknowledged quietly. Granger's face was flushed with more than just the cold as he swung down from his horse. "You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas McCarthy, railroad foreman." He drew his pistol, pointing it straight at Owen's chest. "Found him dead in Carter's Gulch this morning, knife in his back." "No." Layla rushed forward, her boots crunching in the snow. "That's impossible. Owen was here all night. We celebrated Christmas Eve together." The sheriff's lip curled. "Step aside, Miss Caldwell. Your attachment to this killer has addled your judgment." He jerked his head at 2 deputies. "Shackle him." "Sheriff, please." Layla planted herself between Owen and the approaching deputies. "This is wrong. Owen hasn't left the ranch. He couldn't have killed anyone." "Layla." Owen's voice was soft but firm. "Stand back. Let them do what they came for." She turned to him, desperate. "But you're innocent. I know you are." His eyes met hers, filled with a sadness that broke her heart. "Truth will come out in its own time. Don't put yourself at risk for me." The deputies roughly shouldered past Layla, one pressing Owen face first against the barn wall, while the other snapped heavy iron shackles around his wrists. Owen didn't resist, though Layla could see the muscles in his jaw working as they handled him roughly. "Found these in your bunkhouse," Granger sneered, holding up a bloody knife in a leather evidence bag. "Same make as the one that killed McCarthy. You always did favor bone-handled blades, didn't you, Reddick?" "That's not his," Layla protested. "Someone must have planted it." But the sheriff ignored her, reading out the charges in a loud voice that carried across the snow-covered yard. Owen Reddick, you are charged with the willful murder of Thomas McCarthy, railroad foreman, on the night of December 25th, 1873. You'll face the judge tomorrow morning. They dragged Owen toward their horses, his boots leaving deep furrows in the snow. Layla ran after them, her skirts gathering wet snow, her voice rising with desperation. "You can't do this! He's innocent! Owen!" But her cries were lost in the thunder of hooves, as the posse kicked their horses into motion. Owen managed one last look back at her, his face etched with regret and something deeper, something that might have been love, finally acknowledged too late. The sound of their departure drew people from their homes along the road to town. Layla ran behind them as far as she could, gasping in the cold air, her lungs burning. Townsfolk emerged to watch the procession, their faces hard with judgment. Some spat in the snow as Owen passed. Others jeered, calling out cruel names and threats. "Knew he was a killer all along. Hang him high. Should never have let him stay among decent folk." Layla stumbled to a stop at the edge of town, her legs giving out as the posse disappeared around the bend toward the jail. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the crushing weight in her chest. The world spun around her as she turned back toward home, walking blindly through the gathering crowd. Women drew back their skirts as she passed, whispering behind gloved hands. Men who had once tipped their hats to her now turned away, their faces cold with disapproval. She was marked now, the girl who had harbored a murderer, who had let herself be deceived by a killer's gentle manner. The 2-mile walk back to the ranch seemed endless. Every step felt like moving through deep water, her sodden skirts heavy with melted snow. The sun climbed higher, mocking the darkness in her heart. When she finally reached the ranch yard, she stumbled to the well, clutching the rough rope of the bucket line as her legs gave way completely. She collapsed there in the trampled snow, her fingers wound tight in the hemp rope as if it could anchor her against the tide of despair threatening to sweep her away. The yard was eerily silent now, the morning peace shattered. Even the cattle seemed subdued, huddled against the fence as if sensing the wrongness in the air. "Please," she whispered, her face lifted to the crystal blue sky. "Please, Lord, don't let them hang an innocent man. Don't. Let them take him from me. Not now. Not when I've only just found him." Tears froze on her cheeks as she knelt there, praying with every fiber of her being. She could still hear the fading echo of hoofbeats in her mind, the sound cutting deeper than any knife. The rough rope bit into her palms, but she welcomed the pain. It was something real to hold on to in a world that had suddenly gone terribly wrong. The morning they had shared just yesterday felt like a dream now. The hymns they'd sung together, the quiet joy in Owen's eyes as they shared Christmas Eve supper. How could everything have changed so quickly? How could they take him away on nothing more than a planted knife and a sheriff's word? A crow called harshly from the barn roof, making her flinch. She forced herself to her feet, swaying slightly as she released the well rope. Her hands were red and raw from gripping it, marked with the twist of the hemp. She stared at those marks, remembering Owen's scarred hands and the truth behind them. Hands that had saved children from fire, that had worked her father's land with quiet dignity, that had never raised themselves in violence despite every provocation. "I won't let them hang you," she whispered, her voice growing stronger with determination. "I won't let them destroy another good man to serve their greed." She straightened her spine, smoothed her skirts, and wiped the frozen tears from her cheeks. The sheriff and his railroad masters might have the law on their side, but she had truth on hers. And truth, her father had always said, was God's own weapon against injustice. The sun climbed higher over the snow-covered peaks, its light catching the ice crystals that had formed on the well bucket. Layla took one deep breath, then another, gathering her strength. She would need every bit of it for the fight ahead. In the distance, church bells began to toll, marking the hour. Each deep note seemed to echo the hoofbeats that had torn her world apart, reminding her that time was now her enemy. Tomorrow morning, they would put Owen before a judge, a judge who, like the sheriff, probably answered to railroad money rather than justice. She had until then to find proof of Owen's innocence, had until then to save the man who had become more precious to her than she'd ever imagined possible. The man who had taught her that true strength lay not in violence but in standing firm against life's storms. Looking toward town, where Owen now sat in a cold cell, Layla whispered a final prayer. "Give me strength, Lord. Give me wisdom. And please, keep him safe until I can find a way to free him." The only answer was the winter wind, sighing through the bare branches like a mourner's song. Layla hitched her mare to the wagon before dawn, her fingers clumsy with cold and hurry. The sun hadn't yet touched the mountain peaks when she drove into town, determination burning in her heart. She wouldn't let Owen face the gallows without a fight. Her first stop was the Methodist church, where Preacher Tomlin usually prepared his morning devotions. The chapel door creaked as she entered, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Dim light filtered through the dusty windows, catching the motes that danced in the air. "Preacher Tomlin?" Her voice wavered slightly in the empty sanctuary. "Please, I need your help." The preacher emerged from his study, a thin Bible clutched to his chest like a shield. His eyes darted away from hers, focusing on the floor, the walls, anywhere but her face. "Miss Caldwell, I was just heading out to visit the sick." "Please." Layla stepped closer, her boots clicking on the wooden planks. "You know, Owen. You've seen his gentle nature, his reverence during services. He couldn't have killed that man." Tomlin shifted uncomfortably, his fingers working at the Bible's leather spine. "The law must take its course, Miss Caldwell. We cannot interfere with justice." "What justice?" Layla's voice rose with frustration. "They found that knife too easily. Someone planted it. Someone who wants Owen gone." "These are dangerous accusations," Tomlin whispered, finally meeting her eyes. She saw fear there, and something else, shame, perhaps. "The sheriff, he has many friends, powerful friends." "And God has none?" Layla challenged, her words sharp in the quiet church. "Is this what you preach, that we should bow to corrupt men rather than stand for truth?" The preacher flinched as if she'd struck him. I'll pray for you both," he mumbled, retreating toward his study. "But please, don't ask more of me. I cannot help." Layla watched him disappear behind the heavy oak door, her heart sinking. If a man of God wouldn't stand against injustice, who would? The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when she climbed the courthouse steps. Judge Harrison was already at his desk, peering at documents through wire-rimmed spectacles. He barely glanced up as she entered his chambers. "Judge Harrison, sir, about Owen Reddick's case." "The hearing is tomorrow morning, Miss Caldwell." He cut her off, his voice flat. "The process must follow proper order." "But, sir, there's evidence of tampering." "That knife!" The judge's hand slammed down on his desktop, making her jump. "Young woman, you forget yourself. The law must maintain order, or we descend into chaos. Do not presume to instruct me in my duties." "Is it order you serve?" Layla's voice trembled with barely contained anger. "Or railroad money?" Harrison's face darkened. "Get out," he growled, "before I have you removed. And be grateful I don't cite you for contempt." The morning wore on, door after door closing in her face. The general storekeeper turned his back when she entered. The blacksmith suddenly became too busy to talk. Even Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house, who had known Layla since childhood, hurried inside when she approached. By late afternoon, exhaustion and despair weighed on her, shoulders like a heavy yoke. She stopped at the water trough to rest her horse, the animal's sides heaving from their constant movement around town. The sun was settling toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Voices drifted from the saloon's open windows, loud, boisterous, loosened by drink. Layla normally avoided the establishment, but something in the conversation caught her ear. She moved closer, pressing herself against the rough wooden wall beneath a window. "Easiest money I ever made," A deputy's voice carried clearly in the evening air. "Sheriff says the railroad's paying double our usual wage for this job." Glasses clinked, followed by appreciative murmurs. Another voice chimed in. "About time we got rid of that mountain man anyway. Been nothing but trouble since he started speaking up for them Indians about timber rights." "Yeah, well, once he's gone, ain't nobody gonna stand in the way when we move on that Caldwell land. Railroad's already got the papers drawn up. That girl can't hold it alone." Layla's hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms. The truth she'd suspected now lay bare, ugly as a rattlesnake in summer dust. The sheriff, the railroad, the planted evidence, it all fit together like a corrupt puzzle. "Shame about the girl, though," the deputy continued, his words slightly slurred. "Pretty little thing. Maybe after it's all done, she'll need some comforting." Crude laughter followed. Layla backed away from the wall, bile rising in her throat. She had heard enough, more than enough. Her mare nickered softly as she untied the reins with trembling fingers. The sun had set by the time she started the long ride home, her old brass lantern swaying from the wagon seat beside her. Stars pricked through the darkening sky one by one, cold and distant as the townspeople's eyes had been. The wagon wheels creaked a steady rhythm as her mare plodded homeward. Layla barely noticed the familiar landmarks, passing in the lantern's dim circle of light. Her mind raced, reviewing everything she'd learned, everything she'd failed to accomplish. The sheriff was corrupt, bought by railroad money. The judge would not listen. The preacher would not speak. And tomorrow morning, they would put Owen before a kangaroo court, with evidence planted by dirty hands and witnesses paid to lie. "Lord," she whispered into the gathering night, "I know you can move mountains. But sometimes you ask us to be your hands, your voice. Show me the way. Show me how to fight this battle." The lantern's flame flickered as a chill wind swept down from the peaks. Layla pulled her shawl tighter, but the cold she felt went deeper than skin. She had spent the day running from door to door, begging for fairness, for justice, for simple human decency, and every door had closed in her face. Her father's words came back to her, spoken on a night much like this one. "Girl, sometimes doing right means standing alone, but you're never truly alone if you stand with truth." The truth was clear now. But would it be enough? Could she find a way to prove the sheriff's corruption before tomorrow's hearing? And even if she did, would anyone in town have the courage to stand with her? The ranch house emerged from the darkness, a lonely square of lamplight glowing in the kitchen window. Layla had left it burning when she rode out that morning, hoping it would guide her home with answers. Now it seemed to mock her with its solitary gleam. She unhitched the mare with mechanical movements, her mind still churning. The railroad wanted their land, had probably wanted it all along. Owen's presence, his reputation for defending the helpless, had been a barrier to their plans, so they had removed him, using the sheriff's badge as their weapon. In the barn, Layla's mare nudged her shoulder gently, as if sensing her distress. She stroked the animal's velvet nose, drawing comfort from its steady presence. "What would you do, old girl?" she murmured, "when the whole world seems set against what's right?" The mare's only answer was a soft whicker and another gentle nudge. Layla managed a weak smile, patting the horse's neck before heading toward the house. Her boots crunched on the frozen ground, each step carrying the weight of the day's failures. But as she reached for the door handle, something shifted inside her. The weight of despair began to transmute into something harder, brighter like iron in a blacksmith's forge, being hammered into steel. She had spent the day begging others to help, to stand up, to do what was right. Perhaps it was time to stop begging and start fighting. She lit the kitchen lamp with steady hands, its warm glow pushing back the darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but tonight she had planning to do. The truth alone might not be enough to save Owen, but truth wielded with courage and wit might yet cut through the web of lies they'd spun around him. Layla sank into her father's old chair by the stove, drawing strength from its familiar embrace. "Hold on, Owen," she whispered to the quiet house. "I won't let them win. I won't let them take you, or this land, or the truth itself." Outside, an owl called into the night, its cry carrying across the valley like a lonely prayer. But Layla barely heard it. Her mind was already racing ahead, calculating angles, weighing options, seeking any crack in the sheriff's armor that she could pry open with the lever of truth. She might have spent the day running from door to door in vain, but tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, she would make them listen. Tomorrow, she would fight. Lamplight danced across the dusty oak chest as Layla lifted its heavy lid. The familiar scent of leather and old paper wafted up, stirring memories of watching her father sort through important documents at his desk. Her hands trembled as she sifted through yellowed papers and faded photographs. There, at the bottom, lay a thick envelope tied with string. Inside, she found what she sought: the original deed to the Caldwell Ranch, its careful script declaring their rightful claim to the land. But another paper caught her eye, folded beneath the deed. She opened it carefully, recognizing her father's bold handwriting. "I, Thomas Caldwell, declare Owen Reddick my sworn partner in protecting these lands from railroad theft. His honor and courage stand testament to his character, despite what others may claim." Layla's heart raced as she read the words again. Here was proof not just of their land rights, but of Owen's true character and his partnership with her father. This could save him. Without waiting for dawn, she pulled on her heavy coat and headed to the barn. Her mare nickered softly as Layla saddled her with quick, sure movements. The cold night air bit at her cheeks as she mounted, the precious papers tucked safely inside her coat. Determination burned in her chest, warming her against the chill as she urged her horse toward town. The courthouse buzzed with whispers as Layla pushed through the crowded aisle. Morning light streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes in its beams. Sheriff Granger lounged against the prosecution table, a satisfied smirk playing across his face. "Order in the court," the judge called, bringing down his gavel with 3 sharp cracks. Layla stepped forward, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. "Your Honor, I have evidence." Her voice rang clear as she presented the deed and her father's handwritten note. The clerk passed them to the judge, who adjusted his spectacles to read. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as 3 Ute men entered the courthouse, their dignified presence commanding attention. One by one, they testified how Owen had defended their hunting grounds against railroad encroachment, using words instead of violence. "He stood with honor," the eldest spoke, "protected our rights when others would not." The judge's stern expression softened as he reviewed the documents and testimony. "In light of this evidence, I find the accused not guilty." His gavel fell with finality, "and I order an investigation into Sheriff Granger's conduct." As deputies removed Owen's shackles, townspeople lowered their eyes in shame. Layla rushed forward, tears streaming down her cheeks as Owen stood free at last. Outside the courthouse, people drifted away in small groups, their boots scuffing against the wooden sidewalk. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as Owen Reddick stood tall and free for the first time in months. Then, to everyone's amazement, he lowered his massive frame to one knee before Layla. His scarred hands trembled as he reached for hers, his voice rough with emotion. "Miss Caldwell, Layla, you saved more than my life. You saved my soul." He drew a deep breath. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Layla's eyes filled with tears as she looked down at this man who had proven himself time and again. "Oh, Owen," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was never afraid of you, only of losing you." The remaining townsfolk watched in stunned silence, frozen in place as Layla nodded her acceptance. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, I will marry you." Near the courthouse steps, the 3 Ute witnesses observed the scene with quiet approval. The eldest touched his heart and nodded, acknowledging a union that represented not just love, but justice restored. Here was a marriage built on understanding, respect, and the courage to stand against prejudice. The last frost melted from the pastures as winter yielded to spring's gentle touch. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in soft pinks and golds as Layla and Owen walked hand in hand across their ranch. Fat cattle grazed contentedly in the distance, their bells tinkling in the morning air. The bunkhouse stood empty now. As Layla's husband, Owen's rightful place was in their home, sharing meals and prayers at her father's old oak table. Together, they mounted the precious deed above the stone hearth, its weathered paper a testament to justice hard won. Neighbors who had once turned away now came calling, bearing pies and hesitant smiles. Shame had softened their hearts to respect as they witnessed the quiet dignity of the couple's love. That Sunday morning, Preacher Tomlin stood tall in his pulpit, his voice steady as he blessed their marriage before God and community. The same pews that had once gone silent now rang with earnest amens. As evening painted the mountains purple, Owen and Layla sat on their porch, watching the sun sink behind familiar peaks. "Your father's meadow is ours now," Owen whispered, his rough hand gentle around hers. Layla squeezed his fingers, her heart full of peace. Together they gazed toward the horizon, their future as bright as the stars beginning to gleam above their home. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.